I never thought owning a small landscaping and snow removal business would turn into a full-blown war, but that's suburban life for you. It all started because I believed in being a good neighbor, a principle that, I would soon learn, was in direct violation of our homeowners association's unwritten mandate to be as difficult as humanly possible. My name is Mark, and for 15 years I've lived in a quiet, tree-lined subdivision called Oakwood Creek. It was the kind of place people moved to for a little peace and a decent-sized yard. I bought my house here right after starting my business, a one-man operation that had since grown to a reliable 3-truck enterprise. I knew every lawn, every tricky driveway, and every family on my street. We were a community in the truest sense. We borrowed eggs, watched each other's kids, and in the winter, I made sure the older residents never had to worry about being snowed in. For most of those 15 years, our HOA was a joke, and I mean that in the best way possible. It was run by a rotation of old-timers who mostly just wanted to make sure the grass in the common area by the entrance got mowed, and the holiday lights went up in December. Dues were low, meetings were short, and nobody cared if your recycling bin was visible from the street for more than 12 hours. It was a benign entity, a formality on a deed that we all mostly ignored. It worked. People were happy. The neighborhood was well maintained because we cared, not because we were threatened with fines. Then Carol moved in. She and her silent, perpetually startled-looking husband bought the corner house on the main drag, the one with the immaculate rose bushes the previous owners had spent decades cultivating. Carol was, to put it mildly, a force of nature. She was a recently retired office manager from some mid-level corporate purgatory, and she carried with her an unshakable belief that the world was a chaotic mess that only she, through rigorous application of rules and procedures, could fix. She saw our sleepy, functional HOA not as a neighborhood committee, but as a power vacuum. Within 6 months of moving in, she had attended every meeting, volunteered for every subcommittee, and charmed the old guard with her talk of efficiency and protecting property values. They were tired. They saw her energy and thought it was a blessing. They voted her in as president, handed her the keys to the kingdom, which consisted of a dusty filing cabinet and a modest bank account, and promptly retired to their porches to watch the world go by. They had no idea they had just unleashed a tyrant. The changes started small. First, it was a flurry of emails. Friendly reminders, she called them. A reminder that trash cans must be retrieved by 6 p.m. on collection day. A reminder that all basketball hoops must be stored out of sight when not in use. A reminder that lawn decorations were limited to 2 per household, not to exceed a height of 24 inches. They were annoying but minor. Most of us just rolled our eyes and complied. It was easier than picking a fight. We were a neighborhood of conflict-averse people who just wanted to grill in our backyards in peace. But her tolerance for what she deemed infractions was non-existent. Old Mr. Henderson, who had lived here for 30 years, got a formal warning letter because his garden hose wasn't coiled in a neat and concentric fashion. The Miller family, who had just had a baby, got a notice about their unapproved welcome stork sign on the lawn. The apathy that had allowed her to take power was slowly curdling into a widespread, simmering resentment. She was creating the very chaos she claimed to be fixing. My first personal run-in with her was over the color of my front door. It had been a cheerful, classic red for a decade. One Saturday morning, I found her standing on my lawn, clipboard in hand, staring at my house with a look of profound disappointment. "Mark," she said, without any preamble, "we need to talk about your door." I was halfway through loading a mower onto my trailer. "Morning, Carol. What about my door?" As per the newly ratified architectural standards, Section 4, Subsection B, she began, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured finger. "All front doors must be of a neutral or earth tone palette. A list of pre-approved colors is available on the community website. Barn red is not on that list." I stared at her, then at my door, then back at her. "Carol, that door has been red since before you lived on this continent. It's not new." "The standards apply to all properties, effective immediately," she said, her voice unwavering. "You have 30 days to bring the property into compliance, or a fine of $25 per day will be levied. It's all in the bylaws." She gave a thin, triumphant smile, as if she had just done me a great favor and marched off to her next target. I was left standing in my driveway, feeling a mixture of disbelief and a very specific, targeted rage. This was the world Carol was building. The real conflict, the one that would change everything, didn't start with a paintbrush. It started with a snowstorm. The forecast had been calling for a monster blizzard for a week, and it did not disappoint. It started snowing on a Friday afternoon and didn't stop for 36 hours. When we woke up on Sunday morning, the world was silent and buried under 3 feet of heavy, wet snow. It was beautiful, but it was also a serious problem. Our neighborhood sits on a series of winding secondary roads that are always last on the county's list to be plowed. As usual, my phone started ringing. It was Arthur, my next-door neighbor, a retired history professor who had become a good friend over the years. "Mark, you awake? It's a doozy out there." "I see that," I said, looking out at the drift that had completely swallowed my mailbox. "Listen," he said, "I just got off the phone with Helen Gable down the street. Her husband's got a doctor's appointment tomorrow for his dialysis. There's no way they're getting out of there. The county plow won't be here until Tuesday, if we're lucky." This was my winter ritual. Mrs. Gable was a sweet woman in her late 70s, and her husband's health was precarious. "Don't worry, Arthur. I'm firing up the truck now. I'll clear her driveway first, then work my way through the rest of the street." "You're a good man," he said. "Be careful." I owned a Ford F-250 with a commercial-grade plow attachment. It was my workhorse. Firing it up was like waking a sleeping beast. The diesel engine rumbled to life, and the hydraulics whined as I angled the big steel blade. Clearing my own driveway was quick work. Then I moved on to Mrs. Gable's. It took the better part of an hour to carve a clear path for her, but the look of relief on her face when she waved from the window was all the payment I ever needed. From there, I just kept going. I cleared Arthur's driveway, then the Miller's, then Mr. Henderson's. People would come out with mugs of hot coffee or offer me a $20 bill, which I always refused. "Just pay it forward," I'd say. This was what neighbors did. By midday, our entire cul-de-sac was clear, a small island of order in a sea of white. It felt good. It was practical, helpful, and communal. All the things Carol was not. I was just finishing the last pass on the main road to connect our cleared section to the next street when I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road I had just plowed, forcing me to stop. She was bundled in an expensive-looking ski jacket, her arms crossed, that familiar clipboard somehow in her hand, despite the blizzard. I rolled down my window, the cold air rushing in. "Carol, you might want to move. This is a big truck." "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. I blinked. "I'm clearing the snow, so people can get out of their houses." "You are operating unregistered commercial equipment on HOA common property," she declared, as if reading from a script. "This is a direct violation of Bylaw 11.7, which prohibits the use of private, heavy-duty machinery for non-sanctioned purposes." I actually laughed. It was such an absurd statement that I couldn't help it. "Carol, it's a snowplow. There's 3 feet of snow. Mrs. Gable needs to get to a dialysis appointment. Are you serious? The HOA has a contract with a professional snow removal service," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "They have been notified. They will be here in their own time. Your actions constitute a liability risk to the association. What if you damage the asphalt? Or a curb? Who would be responsible? I've been doing this for 15 years, Carol. I've never damaged a thing. The professional service you hired last year didn't show up for 4 days, and they charged us a fortune. I'm helping my neighbors." "You are not helping," she snapped. "You are interfering. And you are in violation. I am issuing you a formal warning. If you continue to operate this vehicle on HOA property, you will be fined $500 for the initial infraction, plus $100 for every hour you continue." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it stunned me into silence. She was threatening to fine me for helping an elderly couple get to a life-saving medical treatment. It was a level of petty tyranny I had never encountered before. My good humor evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "Go home, Carol," I said, my voice low and steady. "Go home before you say something you'll regret even more." "Is that a threat?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "It's a piece of friendly advice," I said, putting the truck in gear. I drove slowly around her, laying on the horn as I passed to make my point. She stood there, a furious little figure in a bright pink hat, clutching her clipboard like it was a holy text. I finished clearing the road, my hands tight on the steering wheel. The war had officially begun. True to her word, the next day a crisp white envelope was taped to my front door. Inside was a formal letter from the Oakwood Creek Homeowners Association, printed on heavy cardstock with a new, ostentatious logo she had clearly designed herself. It detailed my violation, the unauthorized operation of commercial snow removal equipment, and levied an initial fine of $500. It also stated in bold, underlined text that failure to pay within 30 days would result in further penalties, including interest and potential legal action. I crumpled it into a ball and threw it in the trash. I was not paying a fine for being a good neighbor. It was a ridiculous, unenforceable demand born of one woman's obsession with control. I figured if I ignored it, she would eventually move on to her next crusade. That was my first major miscalculation. Carol was not the type to let things go. A week later, another envelope arrived, this time via certified mail. It was a second notice, this one with an additional $100 late fee attached. It also contained a more detailed threat. Failure to resolve this outstanding balance may result in a lien being placed against your property. A lien for plowing snow. The absurdity was escalating to a level that was no longer funny. It was menacing. The conflict started to ripple through the neighborhood. I learned that Carol had also sent a notice to the Gables, fining them for soliciting and accepting non-sanctioned services. That's when my anger turned into protective fury. Fining me was one thing. Harassing an elderly, sick couple was another. I went straight over to their house. Mrs. Gable answered the door, looking frail and worried. "Oh, Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry. We never meant to cause you any trouble." "You didn't cause any trouble, Helen," I assured her, stepping inside. "This is all Carol. Don't you worry about this fine. I'll handle it. You just focus on you and John." I spent a half hour with them, calming them down, telling them to throw the letter away and not to respond. But the damage was done. Carol had successfully injected fear and anxiety into their lives, all in the name of her precious rules. The professional snow removal service she had mentioned finally showed up 3 days after the storm, long after I had cleared most of the critical areas. A rusty truck with a mismatched plow scraped its way through the streets, doing a mediocre job and tearing up the edge of 3 different lawns, including a long, ugly gash in front of Carol's own house. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but she seemed completely oblivious. When I saw her later that week, she proudly announced at the community mailbox that the official clearing had been completed in a timely and professional manner. My neighbor Arthur watched the whole thing unfold with a grim sense of validation. I knew she was a Napoleon in a pantsuit the day she measured my mailbox post. He said over a cup of coffee at my kitchen table. "The question is, what are you going to do?" She's not going to back down. People like that, they can't. It would be an admission of fallibility, and their egos are too fragile for that. "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the second fine notice on my counter. "I can't just pay it. It's the principle of the thing. But a lien on my house, that's serious." "It is," he agreed. "And she'll do it. She's drunk on this tiny sliver of power. You need to stop thinking like a neighbor and start thinking like a lawyer." He was right. This had moved beyond a neighborhood squabble. I was out of my depth. The next day, I made an appointment with a local attorney, a man named Mr. Davies, who specialized in real estate and contract law. He had a reputation for being a no-nonsense, straight shooter. I sat in his sparse, organized office and laid out the whole story. The quiet neighborhood, the arrival of Carol, the petty rules, the snowstorm, the fines, and the threat of a lien. I showed him the letters she had sent me and the one she'd sent the Gables. He listened patiently, leaning back in his chair, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he steepled his fingers and looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Well, this is a classic case of what I call petty tyrant syndrome," he said, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Unfortunately, it's also a classic case of a poorly written but legally binding set of HOA covenants." My heart sank. "So she can do this?" "Technically, maybe," he said, tapping the bylaws I had brought with me. "The language in here is broad. Prohibition of commercial equipment for non-sanctioned purposes. It's vague enough that a judge might side with the HOA's interpretation. Fighting this fine head-on in court would be expensive, time-consuming, and the outcome would be uncertain. You might win on the grounds of necessity or common sense, but you might lose on the letter of the law." "So what do I do? Just pay her?" The thought was nauseating. "No, Mr. Davies said, his tone shifting from analytical to strategic. "We don't fight her on her battlefield. We don't argue about the snow. That's what she wants. She's prepared for that fight. Instead, we change the battlefield. An HOA is a corporation. It has duties and responsibilities that go far beyond mailbox colors. It has financial obligations, fiduciary duties to its members. Let's see how well she's holding up her end of the bargain." He leaned forward. "As a homeowner and member of the association, you have the right to inspect its financial records. The budget, the expense reports, the contracts, the meeting minutes. All of it. I want you to formally request, in writing, copies of all financial documents for the last 2 years, since she took over. Don't tell her why. Just state that you are exercising your right as a member to review the records." "What are we looking for?" I asked. "Anything," he said. "Mismanagement, wasteful spending, contracts given to friends, unexplained expenses. People like your Carol, they are often so focused on enforcing the rules on others that they get sloppy with their own responsibilities. They believe they are above the very scrutiny they so enjoy applying. Go home, write that letter, and send it certified mail. Let's see what shakes loose." I left his office feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The frustration was still there, but now it was channeled. I was no longer just defending myself. I was going on the offensive. That night, I drafted a polite but firm letter, quoting the specific section of the state's property code that gave me the right to the documents, and sent it the next morning. The game had changed. A week went by with no response. Then 2. The third fine notice arrived, the total now up to $700, with more dire warnings. I ignored it. On the 21st day after I sent my request, a thick manila envelope appeared on my doorstep. It wasn't mailed. It had been dropped there, a passive-aggressive move that was pure Carol. Inside was a jumble of poorly photocopied documents, budgets, bank statements, and a handful of invoices. It was accompanied by a curt note. "As requested, please be reminded that your account remains delinquent." That night, with a pot of strong coffee and a yellow legal pad, I spread the documents across my dining room table and started to dig. At first, it was just what I expected. I saw the exorbitant bill from the useless snow removal company. I saw invoices for landscape consulting, which I suspected was just Carol paying someone to agree with her about what flowers to plant. I saw the purchase order for the new, fancy HOA letterhead. It was wasteful, but probably not illegal. I spent hours poring over the numbers, cross-referencing bank statements with budget line items. It was tedious work. My eyes were starting to glaze over. I was looking for a smoking gun, but all I was finding were small, smoldering examples of incompetence. I decided to pull out my own closing documents from when I bought my house 15 years ago, along with my most recent mortgage and property tax statements, just to have a complete financial picture of my own obligations. I had the HOA budget for the current year on one side of the table and my annual escrow statement from my mortgage lender on the other. I was just comparing numbers, trying to understand where all the money went. The HOA budget had the usual categories: landscaping, insurance, utilities for the common areas, a reserve fund, and then I saw it. A line item under annual expenses. It was labeled county property tax, common areas, and assessments. That seemed normal. The HOA owned the small patch of land at the entrance, and a few other slivers of green space. Of course, it had to pay property taxes on those, but the number seemed high, very high. It was a five-figure sum. I did some quick mental math. That amount, divided by the number of homes in the subdivision, added a significant chunk to each homeowner's annual dues. Out of sheer curiosity, I looked at my own property tax bill from the county. It listed my parcel number and the total tax assessed. It was broken down into school tax, county tax, and so on. I paid it every year through my mortgage escrow account. My bank collected the money as part of my monthly payment and then paid the county directly on my behalf. It was standard practice. I sat back in my chair, a strange feeling prickling at the back of my neck. I looked again at the HOA budget's property tax line item. Then I looked at my own tax bill from the county. An idea, so outlandish and yet so simple, began to form in my mind. What if? I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out the file from when I bought my house. Deep inside, I found the original HOA covenants, and more importantly, the public offering statement. It was a dense, legalistic document, but I forced myself to read it, line by line. I was looking for anything related to taxes, and then I found it. Buried in a section about assessments and fees was a single, convoluted sentence. It described how the developer had originally set up the tax structure for the neighborhood. Because of the way the parcels were initially drawn with integrated common areas, the county assessed a portion of the common property tax directly against each individual residential lot. The HOA was responsible for paying taxes only on the few parcels it owned outright, like the entrance plot. The rest was supposed to be billed directly to the homeowners. My blood ran cold. I read the sentence again, and again. The language was archaic, but the meaning was clear. The bulk of the common area tax was already included in my personal property tax bill. It was baked into the county's assessment of my home's value. I look back at the HOA budget, the massive line item for county property tax. I looked at my escrow statement, showing the thousands of dollars I paid to the county every year. I was paying it twice. I was paying my full property tax bill, including my share of the common areas, directly to the county via my mortgage. And then I was paying the HOA, who was taking that money and, under the guise of paying property taxes, was what? The implication was staggering. For years, every single homeowner in this neighborhood had been paying their property taxes, and then they had been paying a huge chunk of it again through their HOA dues. My little investigation into a $500 snowplowing fine had just uncovered a potential financial scandal that had been going on for years. This wasn't just Carol's mismanagement. The line item existed in the budgets from before her time. This was a systemic, long-term error, but Carol, with her obsession with finances and protecting our investment, had absolutely continued it. In fact, under her tenure, the amount allocated to that line item had increased by 10%. My hands were trembling slightly, not with fear, but with a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the leverage Mr. Davies had talked about. This was a tactical nuke. The snowplowing fine was now a comical footnote in a much, much larger story. The first thing I did the next morning was call Mr. Davies. I didn't even say hello. "I found it," I said, my voice tight with excitement. "It's bigger than we thought. It's not just waste, it's taxes. We're all being double billed for property taxes." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Mark," he said slowly, "explain that to me very carefully." I walked him through it, step by step. The line item in the budget. The language in the original public offering statement. My own tax bill from the county. The dawning, horrifying realization. "My God," he whispered when I was done. "If you're right, this is massive. This isn't just a mismanaged HOA. This could be fraud. At the very least, it's gross negligence on a scale I've rarely seen." "So what's the next move?" I asked, pacing my kitchen. "Do I go to the county, the district attorney?" "Not yet," he said, his voice now sharp and focused. "First, we need irrefutable proof. You have a strong theory, but we need to confirm it. I want you to go down to the county tax assessor's office, in person. Bring your HOA documents, your own tax bill, and the original covenants. Ask them to walk you through exactly how the properties in your subdivision are assessed. Don't make accusations, just ask questions. Be a confused homeowner seeking clarification. It was brilliant advice. Going in hot would put them on the defensive. Going in as a humble, confused citizen would get me answers. I spent the rest of the morning gathering my documents into a neat portfolio. My strategy had shifted entirely. I was no longer a defendant in a petty squabble. I was an investigator, and I was about to blow the lid off of years of financial incompetence. The county assessor's office was as drab and bureaucratic as you'd imagine. I took a number and waited, rehearsing my questions. When I was finally called to a window, I faced a woman who looked like she had seen it all and was not impressed by any of it. "I need some help understanding my property tax bill," I began, adopting my most non-threatening, slightly bewildered tone. "I live in Oakwood Creek, and I think I might be paying for something twice." Her expression flickered with the first hint of interest. I laid out my documents, my bill, the HOA budget, the section from the covenants. I pointed to the line item in the HOA budget. "My HOA says they are paying this much in property tax for the community, but my personal bill from you also seems to include assessments for common areas. Can you tell me if that's right?" She took my papers and started typing into her computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She pulled up maps of the subdivision, tax records, payment histories. For 10 minutes, she was silent, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up at me. "You are absolutely right," she said, and the weariness in her voice was replaced by a crisp, professional anger. "According to our records, the tax liability for all common areas, with the exception of parcel A1 at the entrance, is prorated and assessed directly to the individual residential lots. It has been since the subdivision was created. You are paying it right here," she said, tapping my personal tax bill. "It's part of your total assessed value." "So," I said, my voice steady, "when the HOA collects money from me for property taxes, what are they paying you with it?" She turned back to her screen. "The HOA, under its corporate name, pays the tax on parcel A1 every year. It's a very small amount, about $600. I pointed to the HOA budget at the 5-figure number listed. "They are collecting this much, but they are only paying you $600 of it." She looked at the number, then back at her screen. "That's correct," she said. Her face hardened. "Mister, your HOA is collecting a tax from you that they are not, in fact, remitting to the county, because you have already paid it. You need to ask them where that money is going." She then did something I never expected. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Janet, can you come here for a second? I think you need to see this." Another woman, who I later learned was the department supervisor, came over. They spoke in low, urgent tones, pointing at the screen and my documents. The supervisor, Janet, looked at me. "Sir, can we make copies of these?" "Absolutely," I said. "And can you give me your name and phone number? I have a feeling our legal department is going to want to talk to you. What your HOA is doing is, at a minimum, deeply deceptive." I walked out of that county building feeling 10 feet tall. I had done it. I had the irrefutable proof. The county itself had confirmed the double billing. The question that lingered in the air was the one the clerk had asked. Where was all that money going? Armed with this confirmation, I met with Mr. Davies again. When I told him the county was now involved, his eyes lit up. "This is perfect," he said. "They are now a third-party, official source. Carol can't dismiss the county tax assessor as a disgruntled resident." Our strategy was now clear. The upcoming annual HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. It was the perfect forum. It was a public setting where Carol would be forced to answer for her actions in front of the entire community she purported to lead. "We don't ambush her," Mr. Davies instructed. "We give her just enough rope. A few days before the meeting, you will send a formal letter to her and the entire HOA board. In it, you will state that you have uncovered a significant discrepancy in the collection of property taxes and that you will be presenting your findings at the annual meeting. You will demand a full accounting. This does 2 things. It prevents her from claiming she was blindsided, and it puts the entire board on notice that they are now liable too. They can't claim ignorance." I spent the next week preparing. I created a simple, clear presentation. I made spreadsheets showing the amount collected by the HOA for taxes versus the amount actually paid. I calculated the overpayment per household per year. When I did the math, the number was staggering. Over the 8 years I'd been tracking, it amounted to several $1,000s per homeowner. Multiplied by the 150 homes in our subdivision, the HOA had improperly collected hundreds of thousands of dollars. I sent the letter as Mr. Davies advised. The silence from Carol was deafening. There was no angry email, no threatening phone call. It was the eerie quiet before a storm. I knew she was planning something, preparing her defense. The night of the annual meeting arrived. The community clubhouse, usually half empty for these things, was packed. Word had gotten out that something big was going to happen. My letter had circulated like wildfire. People I barely knew came up to me, whispering their support, telling me about their own run-ins with Carol. The resentment that had been simmering for 2 years was about to boil over. Carol and the 2 other board members, a nervous-looking man named Bob and a woman who always seemed to be in Carol's shadow, sat at a folding table at the front of the room. Carol looked tense but defiant. She opened the meeting with her usual procedural nonsense, reading the minutes from the last meeting in a monotonous drone, trying to project an aura of normalcy. When she got to the new business portion of the agenda, she looked out at the crowd, her gaze settling on me. "I understand Mr. Mark has a matter he wishes to discuss," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The floor is yours, but please be brief. We have other business to attend to." I walked to the front of the room, carrying a stack of handouts. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "Thank you, Carol. I won't be brief." I started by passing out my summary sheet to everyone in the room. I could see people's eyes widen as they read it. I began my presentation, not with anger, but with simple, undeniable facts. "For years, every one of us in this room has been overpaying our HOA dues," I began. "We have been charged for a property tax that, according to the county tax assessor's office, we have already paid." I laid it all out. I put up a large printout of the HOA budget, highlighting the tax line. I put up a printout of a sample county tax bill, showing where the assessment was already included. I explained the original covenants. I told them about my visit to the assessor's office and their official confirmation. With every sentence, the mood in the room shifted. Murmurs grew into angry whispers. People were looking at their own papers, then up at Carol, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Arthur stood up. "Carol," he said, his voice booming through the small room, "is what this young man saying true?" Carol, who had been sitting rigidly, her face a pale mask, finally cracked. "This is a slanderous and malicious attack," she declared, her voice rising. "Mr. Mark is a disgruntled member who is angry about being fined for his own violations. This is nothing but a smear campaign to distract from his own misconduct." "That's not an answer, Carol," someone shouted from the back. "Did you or did you not collect tax money that you didn't pay to the county?" "All funds were accounted for," she insisted. "They were placed in the general fund and used for community improvements as per the bylaws. It's all perfectly legal." That was her fatal mistake. Admitting the money wasn't paid to the county but repurposed. The room erupted. "You used our tax money to pay for petunias," one woman yelled. "That's theft," shouted another. Bob, the nervous board member, looked like he was about to be physically ill. He stood up, trembling. I didn't know," he stammered. "Carol handled all the finances. She told us it was a standard assessment." "You signed the checks, Bob," a man yelled. "You're just as responsible." Carol tried to regain control, banging a little gavel on the table. "Order. I will have order." But no one was listening. Her authority had crumbled to dust in the space of 10 minutes. She was no longer a president. She was a cornered animal. It was then that Mr. Davies, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, stepped forward. "My name is Stephen Davies," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the noise. "I am Mr. Mark's legal counsel. I can confirm that what he has presented tonight is accurate. Furthermore, I have been in contact with the county assessor's office, and they have referred this matter to the state attorney general's office for investigation into potential fraud and deceptive business practices." A collective gasp went through the room. The Attorney General. This had escalated beyond an HOA dispute into a criminal matter. Carol's face went white. She stared at Mr. Davies, then at me, her expression a toxic cocktail of hatred and pure panic. She grabbed her purse, shoved past her fellow board members, and stormed out of the room without another word. The meeting descended into chaos, but it was a productive chaos. A motion was made from the floor to immediately remove all 3 board members. It passed unanimously. An interim committee, led by Arthur, was appointed to take control of the HOA's records and cooperate fully with the state's investigation. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Carol. The Attorney General's investigation was thorough. They uncovered not just the gross negligence of the tax collection, but evidence of actual fraud. It turned out Carol had been using the massive slush fund created by the tax overpayments for more than just petunias. She had paid her brother's consulting firm thousands for financial advice. She had authorized bonuses for herself for exemplary management. She had been treating the HOA's bank account like her personal piggy bank. Within 3 months, Carol, and to a lesser extent, the other 2 board members were formally charged. Bob and the other woman took plea deals, pleading guilty to misdemeanor negligence in exchange for their testimony against Carol. They paid fines and were barred from ever serving on a board again. Carol, ever defiant, insisted on a trial. It was a disaster for her. The prosecution, armed with my research, the county's testimony, and the confessions of her former board members, painted a clear picture of a petty tyrant who had defrauded her neighbors. She was found guilty of felony fraud and embezzlement. The judge was not amused by her self-righteous attitude. She was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, ordered to pay restitution for the money she had personally misappropriated, and fined heavily. My own vindication was absolute. The $500 fine, which had started the whole thing, was not only dropped but formally expunged with a letter of apology from the new interim board. The illegal lien she had threatened was, of course, never filed. But the biggest victory came from the county. With the HOA's old system dismantled, the county and the new board worked together to figure out the scope of the overbilling. They determined it had been a systemic error going back nearly a decade. Every homeowner was entitled to a refund for the excess amounts they had paid into the HOA's fraudulent tax fund. About a year after that fateful meeting, I received a thick envelope from the county treasurer's office. Inside was a detailed statement and a check. It was a refund for 8 years of property tax overpayments. It was for several $1,000s. It was one of the most satisfying checks I have ever held in my hand. Every household in the neighborhood received a similar one. It was a tangible symbol of our victory. The community itself was transformed. The old toxic HOA was dissolved. We reformed it under a new charter, with strict transparency rules and term limits. Arthur served as the first president, and his only agenda was to make the HOA as boring and unobtrusive as possible, just as it had been before. The neighborhood went back to being a community. People started talking to each other again, not as potential rule breakers, but as neighbors. The oppressive atmosphere of suspicion was gone, replaced by the quiet cooperation we had once taken for granted. Property values, which had stagnated under Carol's reign of terror, began to climb again. I saw Carol one last time, about 2 years later. She had served her time and was released. Her house had been sold to pay her legal fees and restitution. I was at the local grocery store in the produce aisle when I saw her. She looked smaller, diminished. The fiery self-righteousness was gone, replaced by a gray weariness. She saw me, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old anger in her eyes, but it died as quickly as it came. She just looked down at her shopping cart, which contained a single carton of milk, and pushed it away down another aisle. I didn't feel anger or triumph. I just felt a quiet, detached pity for a person whose need for control had cost her everything. Looking back on it all now, it still feels surreal. It all started with me trying to help a neighbor clear some snow. It ended with a prison sentence and hundreds of thousands of dollars being returned to the community. It taught me a valuable lesson. Petty tyrants thrive on the apathy and fear of good people. They count on you to decide that it's easier to just pay the fine, to just paint the door, to just let it go. But when you stand up, when you push back, you often find that their power is a house of cards. All it takes is one person with a shovel, or in my case, a plow and a property tax bill, to bring the whole thing crashing down. Today, Oakwood Creek is more peaceful than ever. I still plow the streets for free when we get a big storm. The new HOA even passed a special bylaw called the Good Samaritan Clause that officially exempts anyone providing emergency help to a neighbor from any and all regulations. It was Arthur's idea. He said they should name it after me, but I told him no thanks. I never wanted to be a hero or a community champion. I was just a guy who wanted to be left alone to run my business and help my neighbors. In the end, after a long and ridiculous detour, that's exactly what I got back. And every winter, when the first snowflakes start to fall, I fire up my truck and I smile.